Um, Thank you all for coming here. It's good to be here. So I'm going to read a few pages of sections from the book. They're not in the order that they appear in the book, but hopefully they'll still complement each other. The idea, or ideally, that's the good thing about a serial poem, is that you could change the sections around and then still somehow interact. So hopefully that'll work. It's 9 pages, which will be about 15 minutes, so it's a bit of a chunk, but hopefully I won't lose you guys. Thank you for coming. I had a kid-sized version of my father's rocking chair. Had wide open days I spent tearing off flakes of shale from the cliff next to our house. I tricycled down slopes, scraped my arms, and was chased by street dogs for having thrown flakes of shale at them. Thinking but not having the words to speak of the feeling of smallness. The earth's architecture seemed to care nothing for ours. I've almost forgotten it now as I exit into the morning on cold days, exhale and stare at my breath, go for the car keys and try out a line from a good movie to test its ring. I've been dead for years, but so much of me still lives in the places where I stop to look around. Each pebble in the stream lends its shape to the water's flow. The river ahead carries these small dances in its threads. The symphony wants to survive, does sometimes in the form of nostalgia. I cried and it seemed the least sentimental thing to do. This notion of days as patches of insight and loss, a kind of open loneliness, a muralist finding his paint, diving past the wall to the place where his figures go on floating. Since life has come down to a series of I want statements, my friend said onto the phone. I want just for the swallowing of days to be less painful. I want to own a ship, I said, and to spend my time in peace watching the coastlines shrink. Do you want food, he asked. Do you want the company of the women you've known? Do you want God to appear from the air and help you pass the hours with invented stories of how things began? No, just good vision and a simple stare. And when I finally hit land, I want to stay in the way the sand glows during red tide when my feet step on it. In paradise, the flags are sleeping, fading in the rivers without hurry. All names are blood memory. The heart blooming is also the sound of leaves burning. Knotted strings litter the gardens. Each word has its tiny ghost. When I look up, the window is open. The cold in the room fills my eyes. The broken radio patiently gathers history. Atop my desk sits a glass of cold tea. A ray of red traffic light touches the sill. I can hear the young couple on the floor above, promising never to fight again. Only the light that hits our eyes as we exit the building. Only words sung by new genders in the simple dawn. Only cables coiled on a table. Steps accompanied by the sounds of empty towns. Crushed paper, lost cars glean through fog. Only messages deciphered in our absence. Only echoes of engines that failed in the wind after setting the pace of our lives. Only endless replacements, the music that pushed us into love despite everything. Only transit, only every dull reversal of the world. Only a song's shape guiding the movements of a dredged up heart. She throws her gaze into the leaves and it dangles there. The light and the dark and the hours they float and pass by. She keeps pieces of pedestrian conversations safe in shelves. Each winter we sit in the living room and share the news. In our dreams, perfected things fall back to what is ancient and are lost to us. We're supposed to keep looking for new ways of connecting the dots. I just want to be left alone sometimes. That fear of adults being something other than what we're capable of understanding. So what are we now? All these light bulbs sinking in the sea. I've been seeing strangers with familiar faces talking of how time tore up and scattered them again. How many years has it been since your last flu shot? The day took a strange direction as he waited for his hour to pass. Like amnesiacs running into mirrors, the revelation of ourselves fills us with the heaviness of impossible wants. Somehow we came out of all the non-retractable decisions of the water and the slowly dancing continents we walk. I just wanted to say hello. I remember, for instance, how to drive a car, the feeling of being reduced to a limited operator of gears, a speeding up of the town, the give and take of human measures, finding strangers sitting beside us in waiting rooms with good views of ticking clocks. It became fashionable to fall on swords. Every day we fell on any and all swords we could find. If you came across a sword in public, this was ideal, even more so if you knew how to fall with appropriate flair, and more so if you fell with the right people watching. It all ended, of course, when the swords rusted and dulled. No one knew how to make any more of them. Nostalgic revival attempts lasted for weeks. There was no traditional sense. We enjoyed walking across bridges in the cold. Failure was simple and easy. The subject is lost, erased. The subject is wedged between fashion lines. The subject is unspeakable, blue and full of winds. The subject meaning the stem, the instant of detachment, the moment of sudden unretractable freedom, to float, to be caught by the hungry. The subject is a network of foreign veins full of rooms and the irrational impulse to survive. The subject alone deciding the time and place of its emergence. The subject deciding nothing. The subject arriving at its own still image, being worn and used by a few and slipping smoothly through the rest. What's needed is an attitude of non-resistance to the world, a good grip along the edges of it, a way to hold yourself along while the breakneck spillage of its nations washes over you. Let the wreckage of its wars pass untouched. Make way for all our failures. Just this, to sit like lizards, to lie even like lizards under the battered atmosphere, basking in the light of all phenomena, not moving at all as bullets rain down, being happy at the sight of another's eyes, watching together the violent landings, the flower-like bursts of dirt clouds. We unbuttoned our clothes and fucked behind the stone mausoleum, her hands against the cold wall, the hills around us descending in folds of grass and curving walkways in 200 years of graves. Far away, the city at midday in autumn looked faded in the sun. We breathed in small rhythmic gasps, pushed ourselves out onto the surface of our skins, the way exposure made them new, allowing us to live in the delight of strewn garments, in the almost silence of the hollow air, the almost silence in which all the small collisions moving in us like an ocean could be heard. The general sense is that we hold a fortune in outdated currency. We stand with our hands exposed, wander around in borrowed hats. When dinner is finished, I look up from the paper and find myself grounded in the land of plenty with no way of explaining why I need to leave. What happens to untended stories? The last time I sat by the water was a year ago, and we were about to never see each other again for a while. I used all the words I could think of to make the sky stop, but I had no clean sources to guide me. Somewhere in another dream, maybe, our perceptions are grafted together, and we can feel the other floating elsewhere through the day. That little ghost in natural colors, the part of a loved one's memory that animates all objects around it. The wet grime on the walls on the day that it rained. There was a movie on about tea houses in the time just before the New Year's when we boarded the subway at midnight and the cars were empty, the sound of fireworks above us inaudible. Pictures falling on a hardwood floor echo into daydreams at the tail end of the 10% that we remember. The sirens still calling you from their stony mounds, telling you they know you, that they saw you once in a crowded hall, a bit nervous, as if waiting for the world's haggard spirits to arrive by tank. Waiting for the train again. Reading about delicate men in positions of power. White floor tiles reflecting bright ceiling lights. It's Sunday. At last night's gathering, I watched everyone's faces shifting from one mode of expression to the next. There was little to say. Today's news involves a closer look at the ancient chit-chat covering the walls of Pompeii. Outside, a protest continues its march to the college. Let's count all the things we've added and say, did we fail these spaces? We filled the valley with music. We spread our astounding irrelevance, tossed our maps of home to the ground, and now we smile over glasses of wine. We languish in love and lean against windows, dreaming of arrival. Dear mind, I'm leaving now. I hope this letter finds you. Dear stranger, whatever weight you have to give my words, I'll take it gladly to the hill behind the house where we made a small pyre. Dear driftwood, the edge is coming. The planks of my raft have started to soften. Dear tote bag, the things spilling from your ruptured seams onto the floor, what a world. Dear men and women who dally in the starlight, your eyes already old-fashioned. Dear iris flourish, dear drip of centuries-old words, your black surfaces must break to let out the sounds and colors. Dear dying pride, today I wandered out on foot, saw the temples and the strongholds and the sphinxes that you left. He picks up a leaf from the sidewalk. This seems childish, right where he wants to be but can't. Neurotic, small chameleon looking for music, anticipating all the while the need for falling limply so as not to break, holding out in fallout shelters, writing waltzes on bare thighs with markers, trying not to count days. Sanity requires withholding certain information from yourself, or else being okay with breaking what your hands have held so far. He quickly gives the leaf back to the sidewalk. The traffic comes back into focus. The book he holds says a thing of beauty is annoyed forever. Be prepared to start over every few days. Every night he wraps himself in the voices of the people who taught him to sing. The attempts keep him warm. Waiting for each second to pass becomes a job of isolating one by one the parts of him. The winter long ago when he returned, almost grown, to the town that birthed him is still wedged in his ribs. That winter he found he no longer knew the slang and lacked the effortless manner in which his relatives who stayed delivered it. The small bed where he now sleeps sits next to a framed view of neighboring rooftops. Nothing more alone than a clear mind. Standing over the well, he tries to picture the stones he has thrown into the dark. Their impacts bounce up from wall to wall, out into the open air where his ears wait. When the villagers walk by and see him there alone in the clearing, leaning forward, gazed fixed on the spot where the earth has opened, some put down their loads and watch for a minute while they rest. Those who venture to ask why he's there are always given the same answer. I once had a field of dandelions, he tells them, and then centuries of human death fell upon it. It was next to this big green sea where the severed head of Orpheus floated by each morning with its song. His favorites were the weeds in late December covered in frost. He walked by them on his way to school each morning. That all of us shiver in endlessness was a sort of comfort, that we die in these moments that stay in someone else's stash, even if our exhalations enter the air without us. He knew none of it in words, only that windstorms occasionally came and sent empty cans and paper trash bags flying over him, only that he sometimes sat and watched the old man floating in his sea of final seconds. Sitting there, he could sometimes imagine how the decades would happen, wondered how he too would see his world replaced. What a thing to be standing at the edge of anywhere, again beginners, taking stock of our body's new language, the urge to outlive our fathers forcing us to move, planted in this landscape of glitches and wrong directions, young men waiting at the foot of iron balconies for a scene that won't repeat, keeping track of the moon, the opening and closing of the flowers, satellites turning beyond layers of cloud. Under all of it, I lie prostrate, tossing my vocabulary piece by piece till some word catches on a hand. Answers were a matter of spiderwebs. If any perspective is possible, then let me see me through your shell-shocked days, your boredom, or your empty hands. My curiosity swelled as it was left to wander in the hallways of the Palace of Fine Arts, where I first learned to take what wasn't mine or of my station. To not limit one's capacity to break things is what I meant to reenact, but a hole is hidden at the bottom of our best intentions. What doesn't float falls straight through. Empty cars left in the sun, signs that once hung from rusted wires, us and our neighbors in our painted rooms. On the screen were the pictures of our long ago walk on the pier. Your hair before the water, In the headlines we tossed in the fire, we thought we could make out familiar names. The ruins of the jetty, the skyline across the bay. In one picture, your hair frames your mouth, which is parted, perhaps in the middle of sounding a word. There was a loveliness to the way you spilled your wine. I wasted so much time looking for napkins. Next to the generator, a patch of tall weeds sways with breeze. The steel poles from which the traffic lights hang bob up and down lightly. The white freeway walls are peeling. On concrete benches, people wait for evening, for rain, for calls. A hummingbird floats above an empty lot. From a hard plastic bus seat, a woman looks out at the asphalt blurring by. Everything is going somewhere. The power plant's gray fumes blend into the low gray clouds. The tide is way out. Blind to its own end, the hummingbird moves in eternity. Strangely, our joy is to feel like giants, to float down avenues on massive wings. But we all open our eyes eventually, even if it's just to check the clock, to breathe and see how we remain in our frames. We stand in front of paintings and try to see them from the inside. Our eyes curve around the paint, which was laid on the canvas between smoke breaks by some painter who thought he felt everything ages ago. Thank you.